Amidst a perilous blizzard, an ex-ranger comes across a nearly frozen German shepherd dam, scarcely breathing, encircling her newly born litter, with only a ragged piece of cloth as their shield against the frigid conditions. What he is unaware of is that this mother was not simply disoriented, she was in flight. And the clandestine information concealed within that cloth will untangle a history so profoundly sorrowful it is destined to alter all their futures irrevocably. The gale shrieked as if an animate entity through the snow-laden trees of Montana's untamed wilderness. It assailed window panes, agitated the bare limbs of trees, and keened across the smokestack of an aged timber dwelling that had remained largely unremembered at the forest's margin for over 40 years. Within, 60-year-old Walter Kane occupied his groaning easy chair near a blazing hearth, cradling a damaged cup of strong coffee. The hearth provided the sole comfort he permitted himself. The remainder of the dwelling, much like its inhabitant, was frigid, motionless, and silent. A span of 5 years had elapsed since the passing of his spouse, Margaret. 5 protracted winters filled with quietude. Sorrow had rendered him speechless for a period of months, yet the most agonizing aspect was not the absence of sound, but the void. He and Margaret had constructed this haven jointly. They had etched their existence into these woodlands, but following her demise, the walls ceased to retain recollections and instead resonated with remorse. Walter seldom communicated any longer, not even in solitude. His sole company consisted of the photographs he would not remove, the scent of aged pine, and the isolation that gnawed at him akin to frost on a window ledge. On that particular morning, the tempest advanced more rapidly than anticipated. The snowfall was dense and swift, a white veil obscuring everything beyond a short distance. Walter had no intention of departing the cabin. He possessed provisions. He had his fuel for the fire. And there was no one for him to check on, no one awaiting his arrival. But then he perceived it, a sound carried on the wind, soft, almost imperceptible. A cry. Perhaps a howl. Not the untamed, self-assured howl of a wolf, but something more delicate, more feeble. He tilted his head, concentrating to discern it. Once more, the wind contorted and shrieked. And again, that sound. Nearer this time, enshrouded in the gale like a murmur within a scream. His pulse accelerated, an old reflex surfacing from his days as a forest ranger. Nevertheless, he wavered. It could be anything, an animal, a deceptive memory, the wind playing pranks on a weary old man. Yet something within him stirred, an attraction he hadn't experienced in years. He seized his coat. The storm nearly thrust him backward the instant he opened the door. Snow assailed his face like daggers. He tightened his scarf, ventured into the white expanse, and pursued the sound. His boots sank deeply into the fresh snow, and each step forward felt like hauling a mountain. He moved with a sense of urgency, though he was unsure why. His breath emerged in rapid clouds, his flashlight carving slender passages through the turbulent storm. And then, after nearly an hour, just past a frozen cluster of pine trees, he spotted it. A dark mass slumped beneath a low-hanging bough, partially interred in snow. Initially, it resembled a heap of refuse, cast aside and forgotten. But as he approached, his heart faltered. It was a dog, a German shepherd, her fur matted with ice, her flanks barely rising and falling. She was coiled into a compact sphere, her body protectively enfolding something. Walter sank to his knees, his voice rasping from his frozen throat. "Hey, girl," he murmured. The shepherd raised her head. Her eyes, glassy and sunken yet blazing with an unexpressed sentiment, met his. Between her paws lay a tattered, threadbare blanket. Walter extended his hand, trembling as he drew back the icy material. Inside were 3 minuscule pups. They did not cry, they did not stir, but they were warm, oh warm solely because their mother had shielded them with her own form. Walter's breath caught. He had witnessed numerous sights during his tenure as a ranger. He had observed birth and demise, tempests and rescues, but never this. Never a mother enduring freezing conditions to safeguard her offspring. Her eyes remained fixed on his, pleading yet dignified. Walter acted without delay. He gathered the entire bundle, the pups, the blanket, and the mother now barely clinging to life. He enveloped them in his coat, holding them close to his chest. "I have you," he said gently. The wind howled more fiercely, as if angered by his intervention. But Walter turned back towards the cabin, his steps ungainly yet certain. For the first time in years, he did not feel the cold. Something warm was burgeoning within him, something he believed he had interred with Margaret. Hope. Walter burst through his cabin entrance, winded and trembling, the bundle held firmly against his chest. The internal warmth struck him like a surge, but it was not for his benefit. He gently placed the mother and her pups on a substantial quilt near the hearth. The German shepherd scarcely moved. Her respiration was faint, and her ribs shifted only minimally beneath her ice-encrusted fur. Her paws were rigid. Her ears twitched once, then became still. "Come on," Walter mumbled, his voice low and unsteady. "Stay with me." From the drenched, frozen blanket, he carefully unwrapped the puppies. Their diminutive size made them appear heartbreakingly delicate. A faint whimper escaped one, its mouth briefly agape before it lapsed back into quietness. Another exhibited a twitch, its paws moving erratically as if in a dream. The third remained entirely still. Walter felt a pang in his chest. He acted swiftly, his years of emergency response training taking over. The fire was stoked until it blazed, after which he swaddled the pups in a soft flannel garment and positioned them close to the fireplace, turning them gently to ensure they received warmth. Seizing towels, he commenced drying the mother's coat with tenderness, murmuring soothing phrases. She emitted no growl, nor did she stir. Her eyes stayed open, though just barely. "You have fulfilled your duty," he uttered quietly. "Permit me now to fulfill mine." But the recollection was resurfacing, unwelcome, burdensome, brutal. Years prior, he had discovered Margaret unconscious beside their vehicle, trapped in a ditch amidst a blizzard. He had attempted every measure, bundled her, carried her, kindled a fire beside her, but by the time assistance arrived, it was too late. He had never absolved himself, and now, kneeling beside this afflicted animal, it was as if that moment were extending through time, challenging him to rectify it. One of the pups emitted a sharp cry. Walter flinched and turned. The smallest one, the one that hadn't stirred, was inert, no breath, no sound. He picked it up, holding its tiny form in his hands, so cold. He rubbed it gently, then with increasing urgency, pressing it to his chest, whispering, pleading, "Not today. Not after all she did. Come on, little one." He recalled an old ranger technique, heating water bottles and encircling a frozen animal to simulate body warmth. He hastened to fill several jars from the stove, wrapped them in towels, and constructed a nest around the pups. He checked on the mother again. Her eyes were closed now, but her chest continued to rise. "Elsa," he said abruptly, the name escaping his lips without premeditation. "That's your name, Elsa. You're stronger than the cold." Morning arrived gradually. The storm persisted, but the cabin now held a flicker of hope. Walter examined the pups. The largest was moving more, wriggling towards the warmth. The middle one licked its paw, and the third, the smallest, suddenly twitched in his palm. Walter gasped, "Come on! Come on!" A tiny squeak emanated from the pup's mouth, then another. It coughed once feebly and opened its eyes. Just a sliver, just enough. Walter's shoulders slumped with relief. He turned to Elsa. Her breathing had grown stronger. Her chest rose in a steady rhythm now. She didn't open her eyes, but her ear twitched when he spoke. "You did it, girl. You kept them alive." He reached out and gently stroked her head. She offered no resistance, didn't flinch. Her body, while still trembling, was no longer rigid with fear or cold. She was fighting just like her pups. Walter picked up the antiquated landline, hoping the storm hadn't rendered it inoperable. He dialed the closest animal clinic, a small establishment run by an old acquaintance of his late wife. A nurse responded, her voice drowsy. "I need help," Walter stated. "I have a mother dog and 3 pups, barely alive. I've done what I can, but—" "Where are you?" the nurse inquired. "We can try to reach you." "The storm's too severe," he said. "I know you won't be able to get here for another day or 2. Just tell me what else I can do." They conversed for 15 minutes. He noted every instruction, every detail, electrolyte solutions, feeding schedules, warning indicators. Finally, he concluded the call, sitting down beside Elsa and the pups. The cabin was quiet once more, apart from the crackling fire and the occasional whimper from the little ones. Walter did not speak. He merely listened to the soft sounds of life returning. and for the first time in years he didn't feel desolate. The tempest outside had at last subsided into a gentle flurry of snow, but within the cabin, the ambience was anything but tranquil. Walter sat next to Elsa, observing the firelight dance over her resting figure. Her respiration had become regular, yet she remained feeble, her head pillowed on her front paws, her fur still moist in patches despite his meticulous drying. The three pups, now ensconced together in an improvised cot of towels and warmed blankets, had started to emit tiny, soft sounds, squeaks and whimpers that somehow lessened the oppressive silence in the room. Walter had been awake for over 24 hours, but weariness could not quiet his thoughts. Something concerning Elsa continued to vex him, something beyond the cold, beyond the ordeal she had withstood. His gaze drifted to the tattered blanket she had employed to shield her pups. It was more than a mere piece of cloth. It had appeared deliberate, as if she had selected it, not simply chanced upon it. The material, though worn and soiled by the snow, was distinctly unlike the sort of refuse one would find strewn in the woods. It was clean at its core, as though it belonged in someone's dwelling. He picked it up slowly, passing it through his hands, noting the texture of soft cotton beneath the frost. That was when he noticed it. Stitched into one corner, indistinct and somewhat frayed, were the initials JC. Walter froze. A peculiar chill ascended his spine. This blanket was not fortuitous. It was personal, monogrammed, cherished. Elsa hadn't dragged a piece of refuse into the woods. She had carried a memento. She had carried a connection to something, someone. He folded the blanket carefully and placed it aside, now more inquisitive than ever. This dog hadn't just blundered into the storm. She was fleeing from something or someone, and she had opted to protect her offspring with a blanket that held significance. Walter leaned back, staring into the fire, the gravity of that realization beginning to develop into something else. Apprehension. As night descended once more, the wind murmured against the windows. But it did not instill fear. It prompted reflection. Walter sat on the floor, his back against the stone fireplace, Elsa lying mere inches away. He spoke quietly, uncertain of his reasons. Perhaps it was the silence. Perhaps it was the burden of the recent days finally breaching a barrier he believed was permanently sealed. "You remind me of someone," he murmured. "Margaret had eyes like yours, full of fight, gentle when necessary, but unafraid of pain." Elsa shifted slightly, her ears twitching as if she were attentive. "I wasn't always this way," he said. "I used to believe people could change. I used to believe I could mend things until I couldn't." He looked at the pups. They were breathing steadily now, warm and secure. And yet, something inside him twisted, because not all things had been salvaged. Not everyone could be rescued from the cold. "My son's name was James," he continued. "Ran off when he was 17. I said things I shouldn't have, things I thought were right at the time, but Margaret knew better. She told me to fix it before it was too late. And now—" He did not complete the sentence. Elsa opened her eyes and looked at him. Just for a moment, a silent communion of suffering, of survival, of something unvoiced but profoundly comprehended. As the hours elapsed, Walter persisted in caring for them all. Feeding the pups small quantities of warm formula he had hastily prepared, gently cleansing Elsa's paws, and brushing through the matted fur around her neck. She no longer resisted. She permitted his assistance, not entirely trusting, not completely at ease, but ceasing her opposition. However, the night had not yet finished unveiling its secrets. At approximately 3 a.m., one of the pups emitted a howl. A small, delicate sound, yet persistent. Walter roused himself from his light slumber and approached, checking their warmth, ensuring nothing was amiss. Then he heard it again, not from the pup, but from outside. A branch snapped, then another. He stood perfectly still. Beyond the soft crackle of the fire and the occasional gust of wind, there was something else. A faint crunch of footsteps. Not animal, heavy, deliberate. He moved slowly to the window, drawing back the curtain just enough to peer through the frost. The moonlight illuminated a small patch near the treeline. That was when he saw it. a figure standing motionless, observing the cabin. Walter's chest tightened. He blinked, looked again, but the figure was gone. He didn't know who or what had been watching, but something about the way Elsa now stared at that same window, ears upright, eyes alert, confirmed his fear. She hadn't merely survived the storm. She was hiding from something that hadn't ceased its pursuit. Walter did not sleep for the remainder of the night, not after his sighting. That figure, too tall for a youth, too still for a mere wanderer, awakened something primal within him. Fear, certainly, but also a query. Who would be observing an old man's cabin amidst a snowstorm? And more significantly, why at this particular time? He occupied the early hours inspecting all doors and windows, fortifying them with furniture and logs cut from his shed. Elsa tracked him with her eyes, her body still too feeble for much movement. Yet a knowingness in her gaze suggested she had encountered that shadow before. The pups slept, huddled closely together in the warmth he had painstakingly created. Periodically, one of them would emit a tiny whine or squeak. Walter would pause his activities, approach, and gently rest a hand near them, just to feel that spark of life. It grounded him, reminded him why he couldn't ignore this, why this was more than a simple rescue. When daylight finally arrived, gray and heavy with cloud cover, Walter poured himself a black coffee and sat at the kitchen table. The blanket, the one bearing the initials JC, lay folded beside him. He gazed at those letters for a considerable time. That wasn't merely a clue. It was someone's name, someone who had cherished this dog. On an impulse, he opened his old laptop, dust-laden and sluggish. It required several attempts to connect to the weak satellite internet he still maintained for emergencies. He accessed a local town forum, one where neighbors occasionally posted about missing pets, old tools for sale, or weather advisories. In the Lost and Found section, he typed a brief message. German Shepherd found near Clearwater Ridge. Appears recently pregnant, scarred, weak. Wrapped pups in a blanket marked JC. Contact Walter C. He paused before submitting the post, then proceeded anyway. Elsa stirred slightly, observing him from her bed of quilts and towels. Her eyes were sharper now, more alert. She no longer resembled the dying creature he had carried through the storm. She looked like a mother safeguarding her den, and Walter respected that. Mid-morning, as he prepared more warm formula for the pups, his gaze fell upon her again. Something about her posture, the cautious angle of her head, the protective tension in her limbs, reminded him of his wife. He chuckled softly. "Margaret would have loved you," he said. "You're a fighter." His voice cracked on the final word. Elsa blinked slowly and, to his astonishment, extended her nose towards his hand. He stilled, and then she touched his palm, just briefly, a whisper of trust, a filament between two beings who had lost so much and were not yet finished fighting. Hours passed, and the silence returned until the telephone rang. Walter, startled, that landline hadn't sounded in over 6 months. He picked it up slowly, cautiously. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was soft, tense, a woman. I saw your post," she said. "About the dog. I think her name is Elsa." Walter gripped the phone tighter. "Who is this?" "My name is Claire Jensen," the woman replied, her voice trembling. "She was my daughter's dog. My daughter passed away last year." A long pause ensued. Walter's throat constricted. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "She disappeared," Claire continued. "Elsa. One night she was just gone, but she was pregnant. We were going to help her through it, but then she vanished." Walter looked at Elsa. The dog's ears had perked at the sound of the phone ringing, and now, though still too weak to rise, her head was lifted, listening. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" he asked. Claire didn't respond immediately. Then she said there's a tiny scar behind her right ear from when she tried to jump through the screen door as a puppy. Walter swallowed. He moved towards Elsa, kneeling gently beside her. He brushed back the fur behind her right ear, and there it was, a small, faint line. "Why now?" Walter asked softly. "Why call now?" Claire's voice cracked. "Because someone came to my door last night. Said they knew where Elsa was. Said if I ever wanted to see her again, I'd have to pay." A cold silence stretched between them. Walter's voice dropped. "Did he say anything else?" "No, just that I should keep quiet." He glanced again at the tree lean beyond the cabin, at the blanket, at the pups. The weight of something vast and dangerous began pressing down on his shoulders. "Stay put," Walter said. "Don't talk to anyone else. I'll call you when I know more." He hung up. The truth was emerging now, inch by inch, and somewhere in the frozen woods someone else knew Elsa wasn't lost. She had escaped. The subsequent morning brought no sunshine, merely a subdued gray sky that enveloped the land in quietude. The snow had diminished, but the cold felt more intense, as if something unseen lurked just beyond the trees. Walter moved with a quiet determination as he attended to the pups and checked on Elsa, who was gradually recuperating. She had started to shift on her own, nudging the pups nearer to her warmth, licking them gently with a mother's inherent grace. There was vitality in her now alongside her weariness. Walter's thoughts dwelled on the telephone conversation with Claire Jensen. Her voice still resonated in his mind, afraid, hesitant, yet clinging to hope. There was something in her manner of speaking about Elsa that had affected him, genuine affection tinged with remorse. He couldn't dispel the image of her at her doorstep, someone intimidating her over a dog, over Elsa. He ventured outside with his axe, heading towards the woodpile, requiring the diversion of physical exertion. The snow lay thick, deadening his footfalls. Yet something felt amiss. He paused, turning towards the cabin. That was when he noticed them, tracks. They were not his. They were not from the preceding night. These were recent, broad, heavy, leading from the forest to the rear of the cabin and then away again, veering towards the eastern ridge. Walter's stomach constricted. Whoever had observed him 2 nights prior had drawn nearer, perhaps even right up to the door. And not just once. He surveyed the trees, but the surroundings remained still, too still. He followed the tracks for a brief distance, halting when he saw a broken branch snapped cleanly as if someone had slipped in the snow and reached out for support. And there, suspended from the end, was a torn fragment of cloth, dark green, frayed at the edge. Not the color of a hunter's jacket or snow attire, this was urban, worn, a reminder that whoever had come was not merely lost, they were watching. Returning to the cabin, Walter secured the doors, bolted the windows, and re-inspected the snare traps he had concealed around the perimeter. Old ranger practices now applied to something far more personal. He moved through each room with silent urgency, the weight of his instincts pressing upon his chest. Inside, Elsa had risen halfway, her eyes fixed on the front door, her ears pointed and alert. She growled, low and steady, protective. Walter knelt beside her, placing a hand on her head. "You saw him, didn't you?" he said softly. She didn't respond, but she didn't need to. The look in her eyes conveyed everything. That night, as snow drifted languidly through the sky and the wind pressed gently against the glass, Walter finally allowed himself to sit. He poured a small measure of the bourbon he reserved for long winters and sat near the fire, Elsa at his feet. The pups, now stronger, wobbled and crawled in their blanket bed, occasionally emitting soft yelps that filled the cabin with a strange, hopeful melody. He leaned back and closed his eyes, and memories surged forth. He recalled James, his son, the final dispute they'd had. Walter had accused him of being irresponsible, unappreciative. James had retorted, told him he didn't comprehend, that he never listened, that he was too cold, too inflexible. And then the slam of the door, tires spinning on gravel, a silence that never mended. Walter opened his eyes, his throat thick. He looked at Elsa. "I lost him just like I lost her." For the first time in years, the ache in his chest didn't feel like retribution, it felt like a wound yearning to heal. Then, just after midnight, the electricity failed. The cabin plunged into darkness. Walter grabbed his flashlight, his heart racing. He lit the lantern near the fireplace, casting a warm but restricted glow across the room. Elsa had already risen to her feet, weak but alert, her body forming a shield in front of her pups. Her growl returned, deeper this time, more guttural. And then came the sound, a creak from the front porch. Walter didn't move, he barely breathed. Then another creak, slow, deliberate, the unmistakable sound of a boot on wood. He reached for the rifle resting behind the doorframe, the same one he'd used during rescue missions, and stepped towards the entrance. Elsa stayed at the center of the room, her body frozen in defense, her pups crying softly behind her. The firelight danced over her fur, illuminating every scar, every sign of the battle she'd already fought. And still, she stood ready. Walter gripped the door handle, his heart pounding like a war drum. Then he flung it open. And there, collapsed in the snow, was a man. Blood on his jacket, frost in his beard, and with his final breath before falling unconscious, he whispered one word, "Elsa." Walter hauled the unconscious man into the cabin, clenching his teeth as he gently positioned him on the floor near the fire. His jacket was saturated with blood, partly from an injury to his side, the remainder freezing against the material like fragile ice. Walter seized clean towels and applied them to the wound, moving rapidly, instinctively as he had during wilderness rescues. Elsa remained immobile where she stood, growling low and ceaselessly, not moving a muscle except to shift protectively between the man and her pups. The man stirred, his head lolling feebly to one side. "Elsa," he murmured again, his voice barely a whisper. Walter narrowed his eyes. "You know her?" The man attempted to speak, but his eyes rolled back, his body becoming limp. Walter cursed under his breath and retrieved an emergency medical kit from the closet, old supplies, but still serviceable. He cleansed and bandaged the wound as best he could. The man was pallid, ice clinging to his eyelashes and beard. Whoever he was, he hadn't merely been lost, he had been pursued by something colder than the storm. It took nearly an hour for him to regain consciousness. Walter sat opposite him, rifle within reach as the fire cast wavering shadows across the room. Finally, the man's eyes flickered open, hunted and wild. "Where am I?" he rasped. "You're safe for now," Walter stated carefully. "Start talking." The man coughed, wincing as pain racked his side. "My name's Caleb Jensen, Claire's husband. Elsa used to be ours." Walter felt the name strike him like a resonant sound. Claire Jensen, the woman on the telephone, the one who mentioned her daughter had passed, who claimed Elsa had disappeared. Caleb saw Elsa in the corner. His voice cracked. "She made it. She got away." Walter remained silent. He waited. Caleb swallowed, then began, his voice quiet and trembling. "My daughter Lily was sick, cancer. Diagnosed when she was 9. Elsa came into our lives during her last year, part of a therapy dog program. But it wasn't therapy, it was salvation. Lily adored her, wouldn't let her out of sight. Elsa slept beside her hospital bed every night." A long pause followed. His eyes watered. "When Lily died, Elsa stayed by her empty bed for days. She wouldn't eat, wouldn't move. Claire, she changed after that. She was so broken. We both were. But Claire, she started listening to this guy. Said he was a trainer. Said Elsa needed to be reconditioned, that she was grieving too hard and would get dangerous." Walter clenched his jaw. "Let me guess, he wasn't a trainer." Caleb nodded slowly. "He was a trafficker. He took dogs, good dogs like Elsa, and sold them. Claire didn't know at first, but when I found out, I tried to stop him." "And he did that to you?" Walter asked, glancing towards the bandaged wound. "I tried to get Elsa back," Caleb said. "Tracked them to a facility outside town. I confronted him. He had people. They beat me, left me in the woods to die. I didn't even know Elsa had escaped until someone showed up at Claire's door demanding money. He told her the dog was still alive and if she wanted her back, she'd have to pay." Walter stood, pacing. The pieces were falling into place, the blanket, the initials, the threats. Elsa hadn't merely survived, she had run, pregnant, wounded, through a winter storm, carrying her pups and a symbol of the child she lost. "She's more than a dog," Caleb said quietly, watching Elsa with reverence. "She's the last piece of our daughter we have." Walter turned to look at her. She was still watching Caleb, ears twitching, her growl faded but not gone. He took a step closer, kneeling to her level. "It's okay," he said softly. "He's not here to hurt you." Caleb slowly extended his hand, palm up. "Elsa." She didn't move at first. Then, after several heartbeats, she inched forward, cautious, trembling, and sniffed his hand. Her nose touched his palm, her head bowed. Caleb choked out a sound somewhere between a sob and a laugh. "You remember me?" Walter stepped back, overwhelmed. The fire flickered brighter for a moment, bathing the room in golden light. The pups whimpered softly. Peace, for the first time in days, settled into the cabin like warm air after a storm. But it didn't last. Caleb's voice turned grave. "He's still looking for her. He knows she escaped. He knows someone's helping her." Walter looked out the window. The forest, now calm but haunted with silence. "Then we won't stop either," he said. They both knew it wasn't over. The real storm hadn't even begun. The snow had diminished to a delicate mist, drifting through the trees like pale cinders. Yet, the silence outdoors was altered now, not tranquil, but taut, observant. Walter sensed it in his very being. That intuition he hadn't relied upon in years had returned with full intensity, whispering to him through the wind and branches. Peril was not distant. Caleb's admonition lingered in his thoughts like a gathering storm cloud. He won't stop. Back inside, Elsa was on her feet more frequently, her vigor returning more swiftly than anyone anticipated. Her eyes remained keen, fixed on the windows, tracking every motion outside with unwavering concentration. The pups were growing stronger daily, feeding well and squealing with vitality. Yet, with each passing hour, Walter felt the pressure intensify. Time was dwindling, they all sensed it. Caleb stood by the window with a pair of old binoculars Walter had retrieved from storage. He surveyed the ridgeline, his body still recuperating from the deep injury in his side. He could be out there already, he muttered. Watching, waiting for us to lower our guard. Walter nodded. Then we don't. Together, they commenced reinforcing the cabin. Walter instructed Caleb on setting silent perimeter alarms, not to inflict harm but to provide warning. Ropes strung with cans, tripwire alerts fashioned from leftover hunting equipment, and planks concealed beneath the snow to betray movement. It was the kind of preparation Walter hadn't undertaken since his days as a rescue ranger. But this time it wasn't about lost hikers or forest fires. This time it was about safeguarding a mother who had already risked everything to protect her kin. As they labored, Walter found himself confiding, something he hadn't done in years. He spoke to Caleb about Margaret, about James, the shouting matches, the ensuing silence, the empty years, how he believed he had permanently insulated himself from loss. How Elsa had altered that. Do you think a dog can save a man from himself? Walter inquired one evening as they stood by the fire. Caleb nodded without hesitation. I watched that dog sleep next to my dying daughter every night for 6 months. I saw the way she looked at her, like she knew the pain, like she'd carry it if she could. Walter offered no reply, but his eyes glistened. Nothing more needed to be said. That night, just after midnight, a solitary crack echoed through the trees, a gunshot. Elsa bolted upright, a low growl rumbling in her throat. The pups cried out in alarm. Caleb reached for the rifle. Walter, heart pounding, moved to the window, and there, affixed to the tree just beyond the perimeter, was a scrap of paper fluttering in the wind. Walter stepped outside slowly, disregarding the sting of the cold against his face. He pulled the note free and unfolded it with trembling fingers. The dog is mine. Walk away. No name, no signature, just that ultimatum, concise, sharp, final. Walter stared into the forest. The snow-covered ground appeared still, but he knew someone was out there. He turned and walked back inside. They're coming tonight, he stated flatly. They readied themselves. Walter moved the pups into the crawl space beneath the floorboards, wrapping them in blankets with hot water bottles, checking the ventilation, sealing it quietly. Caleb loaded the rifle and located the old revolver Walter hadn't touched since Margaret's funeral. 2 weapons, 2 men, and 1 family to protect. They extinguished all lights but 1 lantern and waited. The cabin sat in near silence, save for the soft ticking of an old wall clock and the occasional rustle from the crawl space. Around 3 a.m., the first sound came, a faint creak of snow under boots, then another. Walter stood at the door, rifle in hand, eyes locked on the faint shadows moving between the trees. Then a crash, glass shattering in the back room. Caleb spun towards the sound. He's inside. They separated. Walter moved to the front, Caleb to the rear. Elsa remained by the floorboards, her body planted between her pups and the menace, her growl now a thunderous admonition that filled the room. The door burst open. An intruder in dark attire, face obscured, stepped inside like a phantom. Walter didn't hesitate. Get out, he snarled. The man sneered. You don't understand what she's worth. Before Walter could reply, Elsa launched herself forward. She moved like fire, raw and unyielding. Her body slammed into the man with a force Walter didn't think she still possessed. They crashed to the ground and the man screamed as her teeth found purchase on his arm. Caleb arrived just in time to kick the weapon from the attacker's hand. A struggle erupted, chaos and fury and survival entangled. But in the end, it wasn't a bullet or a trap that stopped him, it was Elsa. She stood over him, bleeding from her shoulder, chest heaving, eyes wild. The man didn't move again. Police arrived 30 minutes later, responding to a weak distress call Caleb had sent earlier when the power had briefly returned. They found the attacker restrained, bleeding, snarling, a known trafficker with ties to illegal breeding and animal abuse. Elsa lay on the floor, exhausted and still. Walter knelt beside her, cradling her head in his hands. You did it, he whispered. You protected them. Her eyes fluttered closed, not from fear this time, but from peace. And for the first time in years, Walter cried, not out of grief, but out of awe. The days that ensued after the assault felt like awakening from a protracted, harsh winter. The police had removed the trafficker in restraints, his face bloodied and contorted with fury, but he uttered no further words. Whatever influence he once wielded had been undone by the snow, by the spirit of a German shepherd who refused to yield, and by 2 men who had endured too much to permit anything more to be taken from them. Elsa was transported urgently to the town's sole veterinary clinic, her injuries severe but manageable. Walter accompanied her throughout the journey, his hand resting on her paw as she lay sedated in the rear seat, a blanket covering her, the same blanket, now clean and whole, its edges mended by his own hand the previous night. The initials JC had been meticulously restitched by candlelight, a homage not only to her past but to what she had borne through the storm. The pups were secure, warm, and more robust than ever. They were temporarily placed in the care of a local foster family, one Walter trusted implicitly. And yet, despite all that had been overcome, a quiet ache persisted in his chest, for he knew farewells were imminent. At the clinic, Elsa's recuperation astonished the personnel. She was alert, responsive, and declined to eat unless Walter was present. Claire visited her for the first time 3 days following the attack. She stood motionless in the doorway, tears welling in her eyes as she beheld Elsa curled gently in her hospital bed, eyes focused and cognizant. "She remembers you?" Walter said softly. Claire knelt, extending a trembling hand. Elsa leaned forward, resting her head against Claire's palm. It wasn't merely a reunion, it was absolution. The burden Claire had carried since Lily's passing seemed to dissipate in that instant. She wept openly, murmuring apologies, and Elsa listened, not with judgment but with comprehension. Some truths dogs comprehended better than humans ever could. Caleb entered quietly behind her, standing beside Walter. "I think she's always been the strongest one," he observed. Walter smiled faintly. "No doubt about that." A week elapsed, then another. Walter remained near the clinic, visiting daily. He walked the snowy streets of the small town each morning, sometimes pausing near the post office, staring at the red flag on the mailbox. One day, after considerable hesitation, he composed a letter to James. It wasn't lengthy, just a few paragraphs. No justifications, no rationalizations, only truth. He informed his son about Margaret, about the silence, and about a dog who had wandered into his life enveloped in a blanket, carrying 3 new lives and a lifetime of sorrow. He didn't request forgiveness, he only asked to be remembered. He slipped the letter into the box and walked away. By the end of the second week, Elsa was cleared to go home. But where was home? Claire and Caleb wished to take her. Naturally, she had been their daughter's heart. Yet Elsa didn't move when they called her. She turned instead to Walter, her eyes calm, filled with a loyalty forged in ice and fire. Walter knelt. "It's okay," he whispered. "You're going with them." But Elsa remained steadfast. Claire stepped forward. Maybe one of the pups should stay with you." Walter looked up, startled. "What?" She smiled. "You saved them. You saved her. You gave us back something we thought we'd lost forever. I think Lily would have wanted one to stay with you." From behind them, a little ball of fluff waddled forward on stubby legs, a female with Elsa's rich eyes and her quiet strength. She licked Walter's hand, then clumsily climbed into his lap and curled up as if she'd always belonged there. They named her Hope. That spring, the snow receded more gradually than usual, but the warmth arrived nonetheless. Walter's cabin appeared different now. The blanket hung on the porch railing, washed clean and stitched with affection, a symbol not of anguish, but of survival. Elsa visited frequently with Claire and Caleb. She had become a conduit, not just between families, but between fractured hearts mending together. Walter no longer sat in solitude by the fire, Hope now slept at his feet. And in the mornings, they traversed the ridge together. Sometimes Walter would speak aloud, not because he was alone, but because he no longer feared silence. He would speak to Margaret, to Lily, to the past he once fled. And sometimes he would speak to Elsa, thanking her for things he couldn't articulate. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the trees turned golden, a truck pulled into the driveway. A young man stepped out, hesitant, his eyes searching. Walter stood on the porch, his heart thudding. The man lifted a hand in greeting. "Dad." Walter didn't speak, his voice was caught somewhere between disbelief and tears. James stepped forward and Walter opened his arms. The final scene belonged to Elsa, resting on the porch beside the man who had carried her through the storm, eyes closed, chest rising slowly and steadily. The pup safe, the past mended, the snow gone, and in the breeze, the blanket fluttered, its initials no longer just a name but a legacy. Sometimes the coldest nights don't break you, they lead you home.